Hello everybody! So this week we got a new quest, Secrets of the North, and with that, we got a new Vorkav-esque boss known as the Phantom Muspah. You face off against it in the quest, but it gets significantly harder post-quest. I'll be breaking down gear, equipment, mechanics, and more within this video. Now I am making this during the release week, so some things may change in this guide regarding strats within the future, so just keep that in mind. Of course, high magic, health, prayer, and range, and defense levels are recommended for an easier time with the boss, and having rigor and augury available will again make the encounter easier and trips longer. I'd recommend having 90 plus in the mentioned combat stats, while for prayer you'd want to have 77. So to start things off, let's break down the gear and supplies. So far I've been bringing 5 restores, 2 Guffix restores as a means to heal while mid-combat, my equipment to kill the boss, a teleportation method to get to the bank and the boss, and I fill up the rest of my inventory with anglerfish. The boss drops food and prayer potions or restores, which can help your trips last longer. But you can experiment with your supplies. I use a bastion potion and saturated heart to boost my mage and range levels, but you can substitute it with other potions as well. In my case, I don't bring a stamina, as I can use the spell Vile Vigor when my run energy gets low, which converts prayer points into run energy. The boss drops a very generous supply of prayer, which allows this to be viable. You can also bring a stamina potion though. If supply shortage is really hurting you for doing multiple kill trips, or big switches really ain't your thing, you can bank the weaker switches like the boots or hat switch. You can also bring brews and restores instead of anglers, but you'll want to bring extra range potions or forgotten brews, since brews bring your stats down. The max cape serves as my way to teleport to the bank and my player-owned house, which has a pull to restore my stats, as well as allow me to teleport to Weiss with my portal nexus. But otherwise, bring something to get to the bank, and if you don't have the portal nexus teleport unlocked to get to Weiss, then you can buy an icy basalt. Now the 2 styles you'll typically use will be range and magic for this boss. Regarding range, your best option is Missouri with a twisted bow, which is what I'm using. But crystal armor and a bofa would be the second best option, and lastly would be a blowpipe or a crossbow with ruby bolts and diamond bolts, and whatever your best range gear is. As for mage, I'm using a tunic and shadow with ancestral, but the second best option would be a sang or trident with your best mage gear, and lastly would be your best mage gear and your best mage spell. Now, camping one combat style and using a weapon like the shadow, twisted bow, or bofa as your only weapon for most of a kill is an option which allows you to bring in more supplies, and you'll have longer trips, and it's also lower effort. But just note that you'll have slower kills camping one style instead of bringing 2 styles. Also, to make note, I think the twisted bow seems to be the best weapon if you're camping one style. Now, no matter your primary weapons of choice, you should definitely bring a crossbow with either Mithril Sapphire Bolts or Dragon Sapphire Bolts based on your crossbow. The Zorite crossbow is the best out of them, with its spec guaranteeing a proc on a successful hit, while the Armadillo crossbow would be the second best, and so forth. We'll get into what's so special about these bolts later. In the pouch, I bring Soul Runes, Blood Runes, Cosmic Runes, and Smoke Runes to cast Thralls for extra damage, Vile Vigor, and Greater Corruption, which is a spell which sees much use later in the fight. I wield the Book of the Dead for Thralls, but otherwise you can bring other offhands like a Mage Shield or Range Shield based on your equipment. If you plan to freeze the boss though, bring Ice Barrage runes, and feel free to bring an Ancient Scepter if you have one to keep the boss frozen for slightly longer. I'd suggest 94 magic to access the best freeze spell, which is Ice Barrage, but this can also be boosted. Barraging is also a good option if you don't have a solid magic weapon. And my ring of choice is the Light Bearer, as it regenerates special energy faster to ensure I'll have enough energy to spec every shield phase. Otherwise, you could use other rings with mage range accuracy if you don't have a handy special weapon like the ZCB or ACB. Here's also some other setups you can use as well with varying budgets. I try not to go too budget, as otherwise the kills might be a bit too slow or difficult. Now to get there, having a nexus with the teleport to Weiss unlocked is a good option, but buying Icy Basalt, like I said earlier, does the trick. Then just run through the fence and then down the stairs and continue going down the path until you arrive at the crevice where the boss is located. Now, the Muspah can start with one of 2 forms with different resistances and different attacks. The melee form, shown by its armor being a tone of brown, has the boss chasing you down in an attempt to melee. It has a 5-tick attack speed, and it can hit somewhere up to around 31 damage. You can run around the arena to outrun it, or you can even Ice Barrage it in place, as Ice Barrage has 10% increased accuracy against it, assuming it's not frozen already. Melee Prey also does help with reducing the damage you take, bringing it down to around a max hit of 25. As for weaknesses, it's mostly susceptible to mage attacks in this form, so use your best mage option. Its second form is its normal form, where its armor is green. In this form, it only has access to range and magic attacks. Both its range and mage attacks have an attack speed of 6 ticks. You can pray against the range attack, which will still chip for your protection prayers, so for the most part you'll be camping range pray. Its magic attack, on the other hand, has a unique sound cue and charge up animation, but it doesn't read your prayer until the projectile has been cast. So swap your prayer from range to mage if you see or hear any of its recognizable cues, and after taking a hit, swap back to range. The boss is weakest to range attacks in this phase, so use your best range offensive option. The boss swaps forms after taking enough targeted damage, so Thralls and recoil damage won't add to this counter, but your normal attacks are considered. So for the melee form, 80 damage must be done to make it swap forms. For the range form, 100 damage must be done to make it swap forms. One final note, at the start of the fight you'll notice spikes spawn in the arena which serve as obstacles. You can run through the spikes and around them, but be careful not to run on the tiles they occupy. These remain inactive at the start, but every time the boss changes form, the spikes will spread one tile inward toward wherever the player is standing, and a new spike will spawn under you. Just make sure to move out of the way from the spike, otherwise you'll take moderate damage, which is close to 20 damage, and you'll get shoved around the arena. The boss will also heal 75% of the damage taken from getting hit by a spike, so just remember, if the boss changes forms, make sure to move first, then adjust gear and prayers, as it won't instantly attack you after changing forms. With that said, you can use this knowledge to sort of predict when to swap your gear if bringing both styles, but you can also just do one attack with your current style, then switch your gear if you'd rather not track your damage or you weren't paying attention. Other than that, let's talk about special attacks. The boss will use 2 specials during this fight, using one when its health reaches below 75% of its maximum health, and the second one once it reaches below 50%. The special will not occur right when it hits below said HP threshold, however, and you'll have to do one attack even if it's a 0 to have it proc. Also, it's random which one it'll use at the start, but it'll alternate between these specials. Let's break them down. One attack has the boss dimming the screen and having some of the spikes in the arena chase you down for some time. Try your best to keep your distance, since if they touch you, you'll take damage and be shifted around the arena, as well as heal the boss. The worst part is that this attack can linger on for quite some time if it's the first special, and you can have spikes chasing you down while the boss digs around, assuming your DPS is average. Speaking of digging, the second attack has the boss digging around and popping up, circling around counterclockwise. Every time it pops up, it'll send out dark orbs which will deal moderate damage on contact, somewhere close to 20 damage. And you can be hit by multiple in one tick, so just be careful of that. There is one tile you can use where the balls will never ever hit you, so utilize this spot when you see it digging. You can find it in the description below. If the spot does end up with a spike on it, or spikes are chasing you down, then you'll have to dodge the balls. And lastly, you can attack the boss while it digs as well. Also, the ID of the boss changes whenever it starts digging, so I'm unsure if its resistances change or not during this attack. But after it finishes, it'll pop back up as the form it was before it started digging. However, any damage dealt while it digs will not count for the damage required to have it change forms. After the special ends, you will need to click the boss again, as you'll stop attacking it. Also, if you hit the boss after its health drops below 75% or 50%, it'll always prioritize doing a special over changing forms, assuming you've done enough damage to proc a swap. While it digs or after dimming the screen and having spikes chase after you, it won't change forms right after it ends. And instead, you'll need to do one more attack that isn't a splash after either of the specials end. Now, it has one more special attack it always uses once it reaches below 50% HP, and you do one hit with a normal auto attack, similar to the other two specials. However, it'll know the first attack you do once the boss reaches below 50%. Afterwards, Muspah will jump to the center of the arena, then it'll prepare to do a slam attack, which deals heavy amounts of damage, way above 60, and can corrupt you as well. In order to evade the attack, you must break the boss's line of sight with you by standing between it and any of the spikes around the arena. So always be ready to run behind spikes once the boss's HP approaches below 15%. However, for whatever reason, if there's no spikes available to break its line of sight, start chowing down. Another thing to be aware of is that if the spike special lingers on, they will continue to chase you down and can even push you out into the boss's line of sight. So try to be cautious if spikes are still on your tail. You can do one attack whilst the boss starts charging the slam attack, but afterwards swap to range gear and a crossbow as well as your sapphire bolts. Shortly after the special ends, it'll change to its range/mage form, but now it has a prayer shield. The shield has 75 health and you can't damage it through normal means. Secondly, the boss prays soul split, so half of the damage it does with range attacks will heal it. And thirdly, the boss in this form will attack slightly faster, attacking every 5 ticks, and will do even more damage, with off-prey range attacks hitting way above 35 damage, hitting up to 9 through prayer now. Meanwhile, its magic attack can, according to rumors, hit up to 70 damage. Now, the shield will passively, over time, take 2 damage over a few seconds, but to deal damage to the shield directly, you have to smite the boss. That's right, you gotta use smite. On ticks you'd attack the boss, you'd flick smite, then swap back to range prayer. And as always, it can still mage you, so just be ready to swap prayer. You can attack the tick after it changes forms, and assuming you're using a 5-tick weapon, your attacks won't ever line up with its attacks, allowing you to flick smite and range/mage pray. If you're on a weird tick where it attacks you on the tick you'd want to pray smite, then try to offset your attack by either doing one accurate hit, then swapping back to rapid, assuming you're using a 5-tick weapon when it's on rapid, or just clicking off the boss, then attacking the boss right after it attacks you. Another thing to note is that Sapphire Bolts drain prayer on bolt procs, and 2 procs from it will decimate the boss's shield, so it's highly suggested to use this as your main DPS for this phase. The ZCB really shines, and it's this phase you'll want to use your spec, since on a successful hit, it always procs the bolt effect, which will cut half of the shield health, only requiring you to do a few more hits with smite flicks, or if you get lucky, just one more bolt proc. You can also use corruption for this part, as once you've hit it a few times, it'll act as a prayer draining poison, ramping up from 1 damage to 3 damage to the shield. Once the shield breaks, Soul Split will end and the boss's health will be exposed again. Now starts a DPS race. Be ready to move right when the shield breaks, as spikes will spawn under you and spikes will start closing in on you from the other spikes. This will happen every 12.6 seconds or around 21 ticks. Once the boss dies, however, the spikes dissipate and your loot will await for you on the ground. About the stamina, I didn't really need it because I have Barrage in this setup. So just ignore this, it doesn't exist, okay? So let's start off. We're lucky it started off range, so we don't really have to worry about swapping our gear. Swap your prayer, and then back to camping range. And I'm just basically going to be ready to move when I see a change. Change gear, so I'm going to do one attack and then I'll swap to my gear. Freeze. Nice. Getting the augury doesn't matter too much, but whenever you can, get the augury on. can quickly go here and just AFK. In a situation where we do have spikes though, you'll have to try to make sure to move around while hitting the boss, which could prove to be hard. Do one more attack and I'll start moving away from the boss. Do one trident and freeze. Alright, now we have spikes chasing us, so we just have to make sure we're moving. So I'll do one more attack, change my prayer. We're gonna restore. And my prayer. There we go. Should be changing soon. I'll do one more attack, change my prayer. Do one trident since I'm far away, and send a barrage. Oh, he got me. Oh. Well, I did get hit by that spike, but my relatively healthy should be fine. Alright, sit behind here, behind cover, hit it once, and get ready to spec. Might up. And just flick smite. So not the perfect kill since we did get hit. I think it's still a good example nonetheless. A restore. Rage spray. Rage spray again. Getting really unlucky on these hits though. Go out. And just finish the boss off. Now, if you are uncomfortable sitting at this low of HP, since this boss can hit incredibly hard with its range attack, feel free to safe up. Now for some tips and plugin mentions. Watch your health and prayer and try to keep them relatively high, as the boss can in some stages do 60 plus damage. So keep your health at around 80 or more to reduce the chances of death. In the scenario you get corrupted and you're using Arceus, you can bring Ward of Arceus to cleanse yourself, but you do have to bring extra runes for the spell. For the green phase, keep your distance from the boss and focus on your prayers. The extra distance is so when the boss swaps to its melee form, you're already far enough away from the boss. Right when a form swap happens, always prioritize moving to dodge the spike under you and change prayers according to the phase. During the final phase, when spikes are coming and every few seconds, make sure to keep your distance from the other spikes, as remember, spikes from those will continue to spread toward you. If you're out of food but have a lot of prayer remaining, you can proc redemption on range/mage attacks. Just remember to flick redemption after you see the projectile is in the air, not before. For spots you don't want covered up by spikes, make sure to stand away from them while dealing damage to the boss, especially the safe spot for shadow orbs. You want to try to keep that tile. The boss will dig in the same spots during its burrow special in a set order. Here's an image with the tiles labeled. Credit goes to Lucky Clover, and you can find the pastebin for these in the description. The customizable XP drop plugin from the plugin hub has the setting Show Predicted Hit, which is a fantastic way to track your damage before the hit instead of depending on seeing the hit when it reaches the boss. You can also display the boss's health percentage on the built-in boss overlay via opponent information, or on the boss via the monster HP percentage. Radius markers are another way to indicate what form it's in, changing colors whenever it swaps forms. I've written down the IDs and put them here in the description, but if you like the radius markers you see here, I've also exported them in the description as well for you to import. For speed kills, you can recoil damage back, so off-prayer vengeance is viable. Just make a note that you can't recoil back its magic attacks or slam damage, only its melee and range attacks. Also, don't try to venge during the soul split phase, as recoil damage is not only nullified by the prayer shield, but the boss will also gain more health, meaning you'll need to do more damage once the shield breaks. Seeing that Venge is viable, Spellbook Swap would make for a good spell for anyone wanting to use Thralls and Vengeance. There are optional spec weapons you can use like Dragon Knives, which only use 25% special attack. These are great as you can use extra special energy on Dragon Knives and still have enough for a Sapphire Ball 2CB spec. Pull up to the boss at the end if possible for the killing blow, just to have your projectile reach the boss sooner. And lastly, if starting with 100% special attack, you could do a Ruby special at the beginning and usually have enough energy for a spec at the shield phase. Pet Hunters! If loot doesn't matter much to you, you can leave the instance right as it dies and return to make the boss spawn faster, similar to Hydra. You could pick up the loot still, but it would slow down your kills per hour. You can also have an ult planted outside to spec restore and heal yourself, or even resupply yourself assuming you have a high level ult account with the quest done. Shout out to Lucid Dream since I got the idea from his Hydra streams. Another tip is having a spike placed under or beside the boss either mid-kill or closer to the end, since otherwise the spikes will begin to spread out. Doing it as such allows for you to have cover that can place you right next to the boss, and it'll allow you to get 2 attacks in instead of 1 hit, and the second hit getting nulled, at least if your weapon is a twisted bow or crossbow. Just be careful if you're standing directly beside the boss whenever going for 2 hits, as it can do a melee right before it transitions into its shield phase. You only need to be a tile away from the boss to have your bow or crossbow projectiles reach the boss as soon as possible. Sadly, Vatumikin's Shadow travel distance doesn't allow for your second projectile to reach the boss before the hit gets nulled. However, you could do 1 shadow and then swap to the twisted bow and pray for a hit even if it's in its melee form, for example. The extra hit will help with bringing the boss's health down to increase the odds of killing it in 1 shot once the shield breaks. But if you're lucky, it can cause a shield phase skip if you bring its HP down to 0. If a Thrall is out, resummon it either on the same tick or a tick after your second bow, since overkill will cause this not to work. Credit goes to Mogul Kirby for this find, and I suggest checking out his guide if you want to learn more. The link is in the description. Highly suggested. The only downside in doing 2 5-tick hits is assuming you lose no ticks. It puts you on a cycle where you have to pray Mage on the tick you'd want to pray Smite. But then again, you can also pray for the Vault procs to break the shield over Smite and Corruption. Some other alternatives are specking with Dragon Knives into a 5-tick at 100% spec energy, or even a 3-tick into a 5-tick attack, just as long as the Shadow isn't your 5-tick choice because of the travel distance. Travel distance also does seem to make a difference for the hit that procs the Muspah Slam attack, and seeing that this hit will always null, you could do a melee attack to have it proc as soon as possible, as it doesn't have to do damage. It just cannot be a splash. The final trick is that you may notice that ticks can get lost during the dig special due to the boss becoming immune when the special ends. And the 19th time it pops up is the final instance you can get a hit off before it's immune for the next few ticks. We're going to assume that you're using a 5-tick weapon for the next couple of notes. Now, if your attack lines up on the 4th pop-up, then you're good. You can attack the boss without losing ticks. However, if you attack 1 tick before, you can do an accurate hit. But, based on how many ticks you attack the boss after the 4th dig, will determine how many ticks you need to gain instead of lose. This can be done with a Bofa. So in this example, I attacked on dig 5, so I'll do 1 Bofa and I'll be on a good tick cycle again. Easy as pie. But that's it for the guide. Some things might change as more info comes out, but for now I hope you learned something and this proves useful. But until next time guys, farewell.